Hi, my name is Cindy Rang, and I'm going to talk to you for just a couple minutes about the Shape Cut. The Shape Cut is one of my absolutely most favorite rulers, and I'm going to show you why. It comes in a couple different sizes. It does come in this massive 18-inch, or it comes in the 12-inch. For us personally, we sell the 18-inch all the time in the shop, but if we are shipping it, you'll only find the 12-inch online, only because this is fairly easy to ship and it's going to arrive to you safe. That gets a little bit cumbersome, it's expensive to ship, and still no guarantee that it's not going to arrive broken. So if you want the larger one, I would suggest you get it maybe from a local quilt shop, or when you come out and see us, grab it then. The other thing I want to mention before we go up close to show you how to do this is that it does have kind of this little direction sheet with it, and you're going to want to keep that. The reason you want to keep that is because, I'm going to turn it around, it has some information on here about how to cut quarter inch pieces, and I'll show you that in just a second. All right, we're going to readjust and do some cutting. My daughter and I have owned and operated a busy quilt shop in Washington State for over 20 years. We have a retreat center, an active YouTube channel, and a large pattern line featuring our creations. My two sons work on machines. One daughter-in-law is our videographer, and the other is a long-arm quilter. We are a family that love each other, we laugh together, and every once in a while we get some work done. We have a crew that are saints for their efforts at keeping us on track. Thanks for joining us on our wild ride. All right, so if you look up close at the ruler, what you'll see is that it's numbered 1 through, this is the larger one, so it's 1 through 18. The smaller one goes up to 12 inches. And what happens is on those numbers and halfway in between it, there is a little cut. And it's just this little slice. And that slice is just big enough for your rotary cutter to fit through it. So what's kind of nice is that if you have a piece of fabric and you want to cut this up into 2.5-inch strips, all you have to do is take your shape cut, and I have my piece of fabric here. Here's my fold. Here's my salvage edge, and then all I have to do is lay this down, and you can see that there's a little line right here. I'm just going to line that up, make sure that everything is nice and straight. And then I like to use a Quilter Select rotary cutter, just to, it's just a heavier rotary cutter. Not that it matters. Any rotary cutter, any 45mm blade or 60mm blade will fit through there. 60 is just a deeper blade. It's not a different thickness. So you're okay with whatever one you want to use. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it in 2.5-inch increments. So one other thing is that if you, 2.5 is pretty easy because I know I'm going to go 2.5, 5, and 7.5. If I were going to do 1.5-inch increments, I might go ahead and put a little dot. 1.5, 3, 4.5, 6, 7.5, and just keep going up so that I remember what I'm doing. It depends. It's up to you. It's whatever you'd like to do. For me personally, what I'm going to cut is 2.5-inch strips. And so all you have to do is come along, put it in that little groove, hold it down, and go up. Start there, hold it down, and go up. And then what's happened is when you're done cutting it, I've got my little waist on this side, my waist on this side, and here are my perfect 2.5-inch strips. So one thing is that people will sometimes say, well, they don't know if they like it all that well because sometimes they get stuck in there. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to put another piece down here, and let's say that what I want to do is some, I'll do some 5-inch pieces. So sometimes people will start to cut, and then all of a sudden they'll get stuck. As soon as they push, they'll kind of get stuck in the side here. The reason they're doing that is because when they're cutting, they're actually tipping their rotary cutter just a little bit. So that blade is catching right on the side where it opens. So when that happens, this is somebody who's going to wear out the side of every ruler they have, and they're going to wear out their mat really quickly because they're actually cutting little wedges into everything. And I'm being exaggerated by tipping it that much. By tipping it at all, though, you are cutting into things. So when I find somebody who is wearing out their mat or wearing out their rulers, I let them borrow a shape cut, because what's going to happen is that as you're cutting, you have to hold this rotary cutter straight up and down to make it through. And so pretty soon, I'm just going to cut 1-inch strips. So pretty soon, what will happen is that you're just going to create muscle memory, and you're going to hold that rotary cutter straight up and down every single time. You're no longer going to tip it. And so you'll be able to cut through there every time. Now, what's really nice about this is that if you want to turn these into 1-inch squares, maybe you're doing some sort of a pixelated quilt or something, you can see that I cut those strips. I'm going to turn it. And again, here is my line. I'm going to line that up on my straight edge right there. So you can see I've got it lined up there. I've got it lined up there. And I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to cut on the 0, the 1, the 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now what I have, I'm going to take away my little waist pieces, and what I have are all of these perfect 1-inch squares, and I haven't had to cut a 1-inch strip, turn it around, cut another 1-inch strip. And so what happens is, again, if you're doing something pixelated, you're doing a Minecraft quilt, you're doing anything, it works really well for that. The other thing is if you have weird leftovers. So let's say that I'm done with this quilt and I'm done with this piece of fabric. Done with this piece of fabric, and maybe I've got another one here. Here's another one. And maybe I'm just done with that. So what will happen is we have multiple patterns. We even have our own. There's lots of patterns that you might like. Dumpster diving is one of our more popular patterns, and it uses 2.5-inch squares. So this fabric, what are you going to do with fabric like this? How are you going to store it? And how are you going to store it so you pull it out and use it again? Instead of doing that, all you have to do is stack this up. I'm going to lay my ruler out, and I'm going to cut it into 2.5-inch squares. And I'm not going to fuss about it very much. I'm just going to cut at the 7.5, 10, 12.5. I'm not going to get very much. And now again, I'm going to pull off this waist. I'm just going to turn around. And line this up. And I'm just going to do the same thing. Cut off the 0, 2.5, and 5. So I didn't get very many, but the way that I see it is that in my sewing room, this would just be garbage. So instead, I'm going to take off the pieces that are nothing. So I'm taking off all of my little edge pieces, my pieces that didn't quite make the cut, and I have 2.5, 2.5. I have all of these 2.5-inch pieces, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5. Whoop. Except for those. Those are not, but those are. And those aren't. Okay, so now this is just garbage. This is garbage. These are usable pieces. So I can add these to other things that I've cut up, and I can just take leftover pieces so that instead of becoming part of just a mess in my sewing room, I can throw away the stuff that I'm really never going to use, and the other stuff I'm going to cut up and put it in a basket for a future project. The other thing you can do is you can do that exact same thing with strips. If you have some fabric, this is a full width of fabric. So it's a full salvage to salvage. I've got 42 inches. This is a pretty large piece, but again, if I know that I want to do a jelly roll race pretty soon and I want a whole bunch of 2.5 inch strips, it's really a way that I would say it becomes a free quilt, because what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lay this out, do the same thing, and I'm just going to cut it into strips. Exact same thing. And again, for me, I do 2.5 inch strips, 2.5 inch blocks, and 5 inch blocks. And so the other thing I might do is decide, okay, I'm just going to do these 2 strips, and then maybe what I'm going to do is do some 5 inch squares. And you're just going to do exactly the same thing. I'm just going to cut one, turn around, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm lining this up on my edge, cutting on the 0, the 5, and the 10 inches. All right, so that's kind of the basic stuff, but I want to show you one other thing that it'll do. So there's my perfect 5 inch squares, perfect 5 inch squares, very little waste. Everything is exactly the same. So the other thing you can do with this is you can cut diamonds. If you were in Brianna's class and you were doing the tiger eye, she had you start with diamonds. And so if you were going to cut a 4.5 inch diamond, this is a doubled strip, and this strip is 4.5 inches wide. So this strip was already cut, and you can see it's 1, 2, 3, 4.5 inches wide. So what I'm going to do first is cut my 60-degree angle. So here's my 60-degree angle mark. Over here I've got 45. So I'm going to take my 60-degree angle and I'm going to bring it over to the edge. So I'm right here on the edge. If you can see that, my 7 is right in there. So I'm just going to come in, and the 7, it just happens to be there. It doesn't really matter. All I'm really doing is starting with my 60-degree angle. Now what I'm going to do is, since this is 4.5, I'm going to count over 4.5. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. And I'm going to count over another 4.5. So half. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so now what I have, and I'll keep going, but what I have is my little piece of waste, and I have 4 perfect diamonds. And you would do it that same way, following whatever pattern it is, whatever you're doing. But okay, so the one thing I wanted to mention about the diamonds is that this is just a really easy way to cut the diamonds in case you don't have a specialty ruler. But obviously you want to follow your pattern if it's asking for 4.5 inch diamonds or 6 inch diamonds or whatever that is. So it is a nice option for that. The other thing, 2 other things I just want to mention quickly is, one other thing you can do is you can actually square up a block. And the way that you do that is just by knowing the size that your block needs to be. But what can happen is, if you can see this, this is lining up. I've got this lining up right through the center seam. So, and even though this has a bunch of seams, I might have a block that just has some other sewing or something I can find in there, some sort of a reference point for where I want to trim it up. You always want to make sure when you are trimming a block to make sure that you've got your 1/4 inch, if you have points, to make sure that you don't cut that off. So in this particular case, I'm just going to kind of clean it up a little bit. I really don't have to square anything up. And then the last thing that I want to show you, well, let me just show you that block. So see, it just gives you that nice easy edge, and you're not moving a ruler a lot. And if you don't have a square up ruler that's the right size, it just helps you to have a nice crisp block. And then the last thing is, if you are doing pieces that are 1/4 inch measurements, what you would do, I think I mentioned that it comes with kind of this little math thing. And And I know this has plastic on it, so it's difficult to see, but it shows you everything that I'm showing you about how to trim things up. But the other thing is it has a little chart on here for cutting your 1 1/4 inch cuts. Because what you would do is, for example, let's say, so I've been showing you anything that's 1/2 inch. And so if you were cutting 1 1/2, 2 inch, 2 1/2, but let's say that you want to cut something that is 2 1/4 inches. So if you're doing 2 1/4 inches, it gives you this little graph. So for example, what it's going to say for 2 1/4 is your first cut is going to be 0. So here's my 0. My second cut is going to be 4 1/2. So here's my 4 1/2. My next cut is going to be 9. And then if you have the bigger one, your next cut is going to be 13 1/2 inches. Then you just lift it up, take out that piece, and then you shift it. And what I'm going to do, you see this little mark here that's at the 1/4 inch? I'm going to shift that over to my cut edge, and then my second cut is going to be 2 1/2, and then my next cut after that is going to be 7, and my next cut after that is going to be 11 1/2. And then if you look at that, what you see are 2 1/4 instead of 2 1/2. And so it's done all of that math for all of them for you. So if you wanted to do 1 3/4, 4 1/4, whatever. So it's kind of a nice, easy thing to do, so you're not just stuck just with 1/2 inch cuts. Okay, so that's just the down and dirty, really quick, why I love the shape cut. This is our notion of the week. Again, we ship the 12 inch, it does come 18. Some people prefer the 12 inch anyway because it's just easier to handle. The only other tip that I would add for that is that you always want to make sure that you have a new blade. And I think that that's just a nice, good rule anyway. When your blade starts to nick and starts to not cut all the way through, it's a couple dollars. It's not a big deal. Just always have a new blade on hand. It's going to make your life a whole lot easier. So anyway, hope you enjoyed Down and Dirty Super Fast Tutorial.
Thank you for watching our video. We invite you to leave a comment, hit the like button, or better yet, subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. You can also visit our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or Pinterest pages, or find all of those things and our online store at fabricpatch.net.